Welcome to the first in a series of webinars that MHA is going to have over the coming year on the topic of loneliness and social isolation. Mental Health America would like to thank Janssen Pharmaceuticals for their support in helping make this program and series possible. We just have a few little housekeeping things that we need to do first, and then we'll get started. If everyone can just listen only, have your mics muted, that will help a lot. The webinar is being recorded, so you can listen to it later. And I want you to know about the recording in case it's something you don't want to participate in. A recording will be posted on MHA's YouTube account, and all the participants will receive an email when slides and the recording are posted. So please type your questions into the chat box during the presentation, and there'll be a question and answer session at the end of each panel discussion and at the end of our session. And with that, let's begin. There's a growing epidemic of loneliness in America, and it didn't start with COVID. It began long ago, and it's only increased since the pandemic has begun. Loneliness has been increasing worldwide for decades, and only recently are we really taking a close look at it and understanding the severe negative effects that it has on health, quality of life, the economy, and society at large. In 2020, Cigna's U.S. Loneliness Index, a survey of over 20,000 Americans, was started, and it stated that approximately half of the people reporting either sometimes or always feel alone. 58% said that they sometimes or always feel like no one knows them very well. These are pretty startling statistics for a country where we kind of pride ourselves on being outgoing and individualistic. Loneliness is pervasive. It can overtake a person in a small town or one in a large bustling city. It can overwhelm a corporate leader or a stay-at-home parent. Sometimes it hits people because they feel there's no one in their lives that truly understands them and the pain and strife they're experiencing. For many years, it was accepted as common knowledge that loneliness was most severe among older people. But recent research has shown that Gen Z, born between 1997 and 2012, are the loneliest age group. 65% sometimes or always feel lonely. 87% say it's difficult to make friends because they are shy. Millennials are the next loneliest group. 65% say they always or sometimes feel lonely. And 60% say it's difficult to make friends because they are shy. Then comes Gen X, born 1961 to 1981. 50% of them sometimes or always feel lonely. And strangely enough, baby boomers and older adults are the least likely to feel lonely. 44% sometimes or always feel lonely. Later today, Dr. Louise Hawkley, a leading researcher in the field of loneliness and isolation, will go into a lot of this in much more detail. In the last decade, we've seen a tremendous increase in the body of knowledge about loneliness. In 2018, in the United Kingdom, then Prime Minister Theresa May actually appointed a Minister of Loneliness. The PM stated that loneliness is one of the greatest public health challenges of our time, and she launched a cross-governmental strategy to address it. Part of the plan included that general practitioners would be able to refer patients to community activities and voluntary services under the UK's National Health Plan. This practice is known as social prescribing. While loneliness and social isolation are not unique to people living with mental health disorders, these conditions make it even more difficult to cope. It's essential that we find new and engaging methods for addressing the problem. Mental Health America is dedicated to fighting social exclusion and isolation and assisting individuals to find new healthy relationships and friendships. In the early years of exploring the meaning and process of recovery in mental health, one statement in various forms always came to the forefront. Many people attributed their recovery to having at least one person that believed in them, one person who had their back, at least one friend. And with that, I'm going to introduce our panel that will be coming on. And I believe that we have Dr. Patrick Corrigan, who is a distinguished professor of psychology at the Illinois Institute of Technology. His research examines mental illness and substance use disorder and the impact of stigma on recovery. He is a principal investigator of the National Consortium for Stigma and Empowerment, a collaboration of investigators and advocates from more than a dozen institutions. NCSE research has been supported by the National Institute of Health for more than 20 years. He also heads projects examining health disparities supported by COCORI and NIMHD. He's written over 400 peer-reviewed articles and has authored or edited 15 books, most recently, The Stigma of Disease and Disability. So welcome, Pat. And then our other speaker for this first panel is Clarence Jordan. Clarence is Vice President of Wellness and Recovery for Beacon Health Options. In this role, he provides strategic direction and leadership for the company's National Wellness and Recovery Program. He's responsible for various initiatives and operationalizes Beacon Health Options commitment to recovery-based principles in the delivery of behavioral health services. Clarence is a former naval officer, and his personal recovery story appeared in the National Council magazine, 50 Years, 50 Stories of Recovery. In 2010, he received SAMHSA's National Voice Award for Consumer Leadership. And in 2012, he received the Voice Award Fellowship. Clarence served on the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine Committee on the science of changing behavioral health social norms. He's a national leader and innovator in the field of peer support and behavioral health, and has continuously worked to assist individuals with mental health disorders in connecting to their communities and building healthy relationships. So welcome to you too, Clarence. So I'd like to start off just with a few points that I think both of you have some really interesting takes on this. And I'll start with you, Pat. I'd like to talk a little bit about the prevalence of societal stigmatizing attitudes towards peers.
Sure. So I think the important question is, why doesn't our world support people with mental health challenges? Because I agree with you absolutely, Patrick. I think one of the elements, the essences of recovery is to have other people to share your life with, not just the downside of your life, but all aspects of your life. So what we've done over the last 20 years is we've looked at the degree to which there are stereotypes about people with mental illness, that they're dangerous, to blame for their mental illness, incompetent, that leads to discrimination, and therefore I don't want to be their friends, I don't want to hire them, I don't want them to be in my school. And that shows itself in two ways. One is public stigma, what happens when the average person in the public agrees with this. And again, that comes back to employers who won't hire people with mental illness, landlords who won't rent to them, or perhaps even more dear to your topic, faith-based communities who won't welcome people with mental health challenges as full members and brothers and sisters in their community. And we separate that from self-stigma. What happens when you're a person with mental illness living in this world full of stereotypes and you internalize it and you agree with it? You say, I'm a person with mental illness, I must be weak, and therefore you don't try to go out and build relationships, or you doubt your own ability to work with others as peers, as friends, and the like.
Thanks, Pat. And before I get to you, Clarence, and Clarence, I hope you heard your introduction. I'm glad you're with us. I was a little worried there for a minute.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Welcome. Just to follow up, Pat, one more question. So when people begin to internalize stigma, and when this is a constant pressure coming from the outside, does this necessarily kind of result in a social exclusion and then isolation, which may then lead to profound loneliness?
Not everybody with mental illness is going to necessarily internalize the stigma and feel shame. I've always said there's a terrible irony to mental illness. It's hard enough to deal with the anxiety and depression, but on top of that, you're supposed to feel ashamed of yourself. I think the degree to which people with mental health challenges feel empowered and able to discard those negative images are people who will be in a better position as a result. That said, unfortunately, there are too many people with mental health challenges who will internalize it and add to their challenges of the mental illness with this idea of thinking they're less important, less worthy, less able. And I think that's something that your listeners can do something about.
Thanks. Clarence, talk a little bit about the importance of loneliness and isolation in the work that you're doing with Beacon, but also in your personal experience and your prior work.
Well, loneliness, I think, Patrick, is one of those direct results of the pandemic. Along with social isolation or social distancing comes this sense of loneliness that's experienced not only by people with mental illness, but by the general population at large. And so it's very important, I think, that we pay attention to this. Obviously, there are all kinds of very negative actions that could occur as a result of someone with any type of disability now all of a sudden feeling very isolated, very lonely. And so to make inroads to address the loneliness that people are experiencing is going to be key, in my opinion, to any help that the individual would be receiving.
Thanks. I know from our other discussions that we've had that, we've both acknowledged, though, that loneliness for everyone has been a growing problem for decades, as I said in part of the program. So there's issues that we can deal with right now about the pandemic, and there's a kind of a marshaling of resources to try to reach out to people right now. But in the long run, what's happened before and what will happen after, what do we do, and how can peer support play an important role in trying to help people overcome those negative effects?
Oh, absolutely. A great question. First of all, let me just make an observation in terms of people's needs. We know that in terms of, for instance, that is what we now refer to as internet or online assistance. That number has increased 80 times what it was last year, right? 80 times. So this idea of the internet or digital health delivery, what started off as a little dirt road has now turned into a 16-lane major highway, as I heard it expressed the other day. And certainly with respect to caring for those members that we serve, we recognize as well. And so in early March, we launched our own online or virtual peer support group. Number one, did two things. We went after loneliness directly as one of our objectives or goals, that we wanted to reduce that. And secondly, we wanted to provide a sense of community, that is opportunities for individuals to feel connected and engaged. And what better way than to talk about the strength that individuals have during this time of a pandemic. People love talking about strengths. I see my neighbors up and down the street during the pandemic, and boy, they just really love to talk. And so is the case for those that we serve as well. We love the sense of being connected. We love being engaged, and we like to talk about those things that are positive and add value to our lives.
Yeah, I agree completely about that. Let me go back to Pat on that, just because we were talking then a little bit about the COVID crisis. Has your work had to accommodate that, and has that changed anything about looking at stigma or social exclusion? Has there been a lessening or even a gathering or greater effect of these things due to people being isolated and unable to socialize in the way that we're used to? Has it affected your work?
Absolutely. I think we're having a new stigma we're dealing with on top of mental health challenges is the issue of, are you a person who got it, or are you a person who's either over responding or under responding? And so that adds to the walls between groups of us that are becoming a big problem. I do think eventually, if you listen to Dr. Fauci, eventually we'll get back to some semblance of normal. I do think being online, though, is here to stay. It won't replace, it won't erase face-to-face peer support. And I still think face-to-face peer support is essential. But, one of the lessons we've learned is online peer support allows us to reach out to people we haven't been in the past. There's a traditional lack of services for people in rural America. And so this may be a way to engage. And so while I look forward to when we all get back in person, I also look forward to ongoing discussion of how we use virtual platforms like this to go forward.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting mix. Actually, with that in mind, both of you this question, because I know, Pat, that you have worked with a lot of peer organizations and peer services in doing your research over the years. And Clarence, you've done just tremendous work in this area. Looking at some of the innovation that's taken place in this past year, what do you see that has really emerged? I mean, beyond the fact that, yes, we are going to communicate more online or through telehealth, but there's been some real creativity, and I see a lot of it in the peer community, where I think a good example would be the ACT model, where people are having to go to people's houses, and they're used to that face-to-face, ability to talk to each other and communicate. So just tell me some of the things that you've seen. You want to start, Clarence, and then Pat follow up?
Sure. And it's interesting that you should talk about that face-to-face and or exchanging information. When we were in the office as peers, we had the break room or the lunchroom, as some of us refer to it as, to sit and chat with our fellow peers and get encouragement and get support and share ideas relative to those that we're working with and getting support in that way. Well, when the office went away, that contact with one another also went away. And so one of the things that we have found that has really helped to strengthen our peer staff is to have what we refer to as case consultation, right? Where we are able to bring a case to a virtual lunchroom and discuss the case that we're looking at all along a set of guidelines that is specific to the work or the scope of services of peers, and for that individual to get feedback from his fellow peers. Much like sitting at the lunch counter, only you have a captured audience of about 40 or 50 other peers that are providing you comments and feedback with respect to the things that you're doing right and some challenges that you might be facing.
Right. Pat, how about you? What have you seen that you think is really innovative and positive?
Well, despite the fact we're in the middle of the pandemic, our group was awarded a grant from the federal government to look at peer health navigators. These are people with lived experience walking others around the healthcare system. So sometimes the challenges of healthcare is in Chicago, you got to go to the west side for your respiratory problem, the north side for your podiatrist, and downtown for your meds. And what we learned is in the old days, we used to do this physically, and someday we hope to go back to that physically, but a lot of healthcare is going virtual. And so the program now has iPads where the health navigator can go sit down with the peer, with the person needing services, and engage the doc in her or his office and do state-of-the-art healthcare with the person never having to travel to the clinic.
Yeah, it is kind of wonderful to think that a lot of good could come out of this experience, as horrible as it's been, and horrible for everyone, I think. But that we have found these new ways of connecting with each other. Clarence, talk about some specific stuff that you're doing with Beacon that maybe has changed dramatically beyond the group kind of meetings that you just spoke about, which I love, by the way. And I've seen some other people do it on a smaller basis, but I think you guys have a broad reach. I believe you're on mute.
How's that? Okay. Well, I think exciting for me has been an opportunity, Patrick, to to standardize a lot of the stuff that we do with respect to peer support services. And
well, while we wait for Clarence to unfreeze, and we're all getting so used to this because of the way we have to communicate these days, let me go back to you, Pat. So do you see a changing role for peers? You know, I know I've heard a lot of people talking about how the problems are greater now. People have been under very unusual stressors, and there's a lot of issues that that people haven't been able to deal with well. And so we've got an expanded need for services, but you really can't ramp up services quickly clinically, from a clinical point of view. And then also I think states are probably in pretty bad shape from a tax-based point of view. So have you seen anything that's really kind of innovative where peers can fill in some of those gaps as we reopen the system until the system itself can catch up?
Well, I do think everybody on the call needs to celebrate what this whole discussion led by you all means, with you, Patrick, as a vice president of peer advocacy. From the grassroots, ground up, peers came from people with lived experience, not providers. If you've been waiting for us, you still be waiting for us. And so peers are essentially advocates, the degree to which they can push people in their states or their counties to further support peers. Because if I were to recommend to SAMHSA directions they should use to further healthcare, peers would be at the top of the list. And so I think the advocate job that peers normally do probably is very helpful here too.
Thank you. Clarence, welcome back.
Thank you.
You were out there for a second.
I didn't mean to be gone so long.
That's quite all right. So just, you know, if you want to pick up, if you remember the question I asked before, or we can move to what I was just talking to Pat about.
You know, I think, Pat, and just, you know, just talking about you and I and Pat Corrigan, whom I remember fondly from our work on the anti-stigma campaign, if you recall, Patrick, that was a real plus for me. And it also opened my eyes to a lot of things that I think are very much needed. When I think about peers, I'm now seeing peers working in jobs that are my age, maybe a little bit older even. And I think about the fact, Patrick, that for too long, these jobs have been entry-level positions. One of the things that I think is essential to the further development of peer support services is a career path. We were able to do it with the VA, such that an individual would be able to enter at an entry-level position, but gradually over time, after getting additional education and or experience under their belt, they're able to move up. Well, the same can be said for the work that we're doing in the behavioral health arena in general. I think there's room for career paths for peers. You can call it banding or leveling peer services, but there has to be a path to peer supervisor positions, managers and directors, and even vice presidents. So yeah, creating a peer career path for peers so that we're no longer stuck in that entry level job ranking. I think is going to be essential if we want to have productive and challenging and rewarding work that is really showing the kinds of outcomes that peer services have been delivering all these years.
Thank you. And with that, I think we'll go to some questions from our audience. We seem to have quite a few of them. Here's a fairly interesting and rather intense one. I am in assisted living and have watched 9 people deteriorate mentally due to isolation. We're in our rooms 24/7. Apparently this person is not doing well, and they want to know what they can do to help the other people there too. Some of them are 90 plus years old. This person is 54. And they mentioned that, losing your independence all by itself is lonely enough. So just, if you think about particularly older people in these facilities where they've actually had to isolate, how can we work with them? Is there a role for peer support in this kind of stuff, or a role, for a combination of services? Clarence, you want to start?
Yeah, Patrick, the 55 and older generation is the fastest growing demographic in this country. By some measure, it's going to double within the next 10 years. I think this is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for peer support work of the nature that's being described here. And when we get those peers with the lived experience, and we can train them up to help support individuals, not only with physical health conditions and challenges, but also, as you put it, those emotional and psychological needs that an individual has at that age as well. I see this as something that has already began in a lot of ways. I think delivery of peer services through Medicare is going to see ever increasing applications.
Pat, do you have any comments on that one?
Yeah, I want to echo what Clarence said, and then have this person look in their community, because there are already peer support programs around the country that are working virtual. So they may want to contact a local MHA chapter, because I know MHA is very active in peer support, or the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, or NAMI. And so I encourage that person to talk to who's ever providing services in that assisted living and tell them how to get hold of these people, and these people can jump on the line and provide some assistance and deal with and decrease that loneliness.
Yeah, connecting to the outside world. Somebody asked, and I think it's actually a pretty deep question, even though it's simply put, do people feel a sense of distance, even on Zoom or on Zoom? Do you think it's created an additional barrier? I mean, we know it's a real asset for some people who couldn't get face-to-face services ever before. So now they get increased contact through these new techniques. But what do you think the pros and cons of that relationship are? Is there a downside down the road for us on this? Pat, you want to start off?
I think that's a great question. I think there's definitely an age effect here. I think those of us with gray hair may have found this whole process a little bit more difficult. And the video element of the process a bit more difficult, where if I were to stereotype younger people, if I were to stereotype my children, that's sort of the normal for them. So is this actually undermining peer support? Again, I would just always say it's an alternative, that when the pandemic leaves, the standard we want to go back to is face-to-face interactions. And for those who like this kind of thing, or it's a good adjunct, to make sure this is in one's toolbox of opportunities.
Great, thank you. Because we lost you there for a minute, Clarence, I'm going to follow up with the final question for you. This person asks, how can I communicate effectively about insensitivity to my age, isolation, and loneliness? Is that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it takes me back again to the preparations we do in-house. There was a time when we talked about cultural competency training, and the understanding that people had of it was simply a matter of black and white, and those were because that seemed to be what the challenges were at that time. Cultural competency has grown exponentially over the years. We are talking about issues of age. We are talking about issues of gender. We are talking about issues of culture in the true sense as relates to this type of training. And I'm hopeful that this level of training continues to be high priority, particularly given all the things that have transpired over the summer, all the challenges that have been raised here with regard to generational differences. This is just basic 101 care. We've got to know people at the person level in order to be helpful. And all the work that we can do in that regard, I think is going to make us better prepared and better capable of delivering quality care, not only now, but in the distant future as well.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, I want to thank you both for your time. And this is, to me, this is an extremely interesting conversation that I would like to continue at another time. And I think over the next year, we're going to bring a lot of voices to the table about this. So again, I'd like to thank you both. And then right now, we're going to go to a video of a woman named Kirsten Kaiser. Kirsten is a peer specialist. She's a peer recovery specialist in the state of Virginia. In recent years, she's gone through some issues of her own. Kirsten and I worked together for a number of years, and I know just how powerful of an advocate she can be and how much of an asset she can be. But Kirsten, like me, like everyone I know who lives in this condition of going back and forth with our own mental health issues, sometimes needs to reach out. So if we could play that video, I'd like to take a look at what Kirsten and I had to say. Hi, we're visiting with Kirsten Kaiser. Kirsten is a certified peer recovery specialist in the state of Virginia, and her personal recovery story goes back 24 years. I've worked with Kirsten, and I know how much she brings to support for other people living with psychiatric disorders. Kirsten, tell me a little bit about your situation and how this past year has been for you with the isolation and perhaps being alone.
It's been really hard. It's been really hard. I have, the first clue that something was really wrong was when I could no longer see my therapist, and things just went downhill from there. I ended up having a mental breakdown this past year, and I'm just getting back on my feet again. After 24 years and being in recovery, having a complete mental breakdown was not something I was anticipating, but I'm getting back on my feet again. And I had the support of my friends and family, but I hardly ever see anybody. I hardly ever leave the house. I watch a lot of NCIS.
How do you stay in touch with the people that are important to you?
Mostly by phone, although I do go to see my father at least once a week. And then I've been having people, because I just recently moved, I've been having people come in and help me unpack because moving has been very overwhelming to me. I was in my last place for 10 years and I had accumulated a lot of stuff, and it was just too overwhelming for me to move, but I really wanted to do it because I finally got my own place. It's something I've wanted for 10 years.
You know, I know, Kirsten, that you've done a lot of work with other people who have experienced loneliness, and you worked with a very specialized program trying to help people to build friendships and other relationships. Has that been something that helped you get through too?
Yes, it did. Yes, it did, because I fell back on some of the things that I would have told my clients about staying in, you know, phone touch and writing letters. You know, I write letters and I send out a whole bunch of birthday cards every year. So I do try to keep in touch with people, even through snail mail.
That's, you know, it's wonderful to be in touch with people any way possible. If you could add something to your life right now that would make it easier for you or make you feel that your quality of life is better, what would it be?
It would be having a decent boyfriend. That's the other thing that happened that caused my breakdown is I broke up with my boyfriend of 7 years. And that was not easy. But I think I'm finally over him. It's taken me years to get over him.
Do you have any ways now to meet new people?
I met him on a video dating site, so I'm not going to do that again. So no, right now I really don't have. I had plans. My plan was I was going to go back to college and take one class a semester, and then I could be with people then. But I don't even know if colleges are still running anymore.
So, Kirsten, if you could tell some of the people that you've worked with in the past or some new people that you might meet who are really struggling with the loneliness caused by the pandemic, what kind of advice would you give them?
Phone calls. Call your friends. Have your friends call you back. Make sure that you stay in contact at least every day with somebody, that you make some sort of social contact with somebody, because it's just plain good for you.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us. And I know you're going to be joining us for a panel a little bit later. So thanks again, Kirsten, and it's really good to see you.
Well, it's always good to see you, Patrick.
So now we're going to talk to a gentleman I just met recently, Greg Taylor. And Greg is a member of a drop-in center that's been in this town where I live in Southwest Florida for 30 years and has formed its own kind of community. I mean, virtually generations have come and gone within this drop-in center. Greg's going to tell us a little bit about what it's meant to him. So if we can roll that video. So, Greg, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up where you are today.
Well, I'm Gregory Taylor. You can call me Greg, and I'm a mentally ill adult nearing the age of 50. I feel like I have paranoid personality disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'm a voice hearer. I'm proud to say that I'm a voice hearer. In late November, early December of 2012, I had 2 very bad nervous breakdowns where I tried to kill myself both separate times. It was after I got out of the second crisis stabilization unit, my brother here in Florida asked me to come down here to live with him and his wife, so I come down here in early 2013. My sister-in-law found me a beautiful place to go to in the middle part of the late 2018, which is the Sarah Ann Center. I had my doubts there at first, but the first day I spent here, it felt like I had gone home again. It felt just like one big family, because I find support, and it's a safe environment and a loving environment. But things started crashing again in March of 2020 last year when the pandemic hit, where The Sarah Ann Center had to be closed for nearly 6 months. It caused my paranoia and my voices to really bother me, but I managed through the Zoom groups from the Sarah Ann Center. But when we opened in September of last year, the first, it felt like a great big elephant had gotten up off my chest because of the stress and the anger and the feeling of the loneliness had just gone away right out the window.
You know, I just want to say, Greg, when I reached out to that center to find out who might be interested in speaking with us, Greg just came forward right away because he has found community. And it's something that lacked in his life even prior to his own mental health problems. So, you know, community is where we find it. And it's really important, as Kirsten said, to make sure that we reach out, make sure that we have some kind of social contact on an ongoing basis. We're now going to talk to two friends of mine a little bit about some programs. We're going to talk with Kirsten Kaiser, who was just on a few minutes ago, and then we're going to talk with Denise Babin. And Denise ran one of our peer partners groups, which is something I'm going to talk about later on. But I would like it if why don't we start with you, Denise, and just talk a little bit about the problems that are caused for the people that you work for and with by isolation and loneliness, and how your organization has responded to that, beyond even just the COVID crisis.
So I've been with my agency for about 20 years. And we started with peer programs way back when. And we have the two peer programs within the agency. And one is called Community Advocates Program, and the other one is called the Peer Outreach Support Team. So our agency has always gone a step beyond within providing work for peers and providing services to those peers in our programs. Nowadays, I believe the isolation is even worse than it was before, because people, as I say, are having to stay home. Up in New Jersey, as of March last year, everything shut down. I was actually out since February because I had shoulder surgery. So I was even out a month before and didn't come back into work until April. And I saw that some of the programs, I'm also chapter leader of the Depression Bipolar chapter in Passaic County, where also our Mental Health Association is located in. And I said, where are the groups? Where are we missing the groups? The guys need these groups. They have to be connected. There is no connection here. So what we did, we opened up the groups 1 week, signed up with Zoom. 1 week I opened one group. Second week I opened the second one. The third week I opened another group in the afternoon. So we saw that all of a sudden we had a big influx of people wanting to be connected to Zoom. And we've seen a big question about how were we going to connect these folks when they didn't have the means. So it was a big adjustment for me personally, not only during the pandemic, but before the pandemic always hit, there were always problems with isolation as long as I can remember. Yeah. And what we did in these two programs were not only individually would we take these individuals out, connect them to resources in the community, most of all peer services in the community, whether it was respite services, whether it was just getting a library card from the library, whether it was going out of their choice to go to a park. Back then you could still feed the ducks. Now they tell us not to do that anymore. But we still went out and went to the parks, but then walked. So they did actually stuff that they wanted to do with an assistance of a peer. If they wanted to go back to school, anything that they put on the table and said, I would like to try this. As long as it was in the realm of our county and catchment area. So we're in New Jersey. Of course, we're not going to go to Connecticut, right? So we went locally. And even if they just wanted to have a cup of coffee, or if they just wanted to go out to the theater once or a local museum. And that's what we did culturally, fun stuff. And then we had group outreaches. And we had group outreaches because we felt like not only do they need a one-on-one peer support, but they need connectedness to other individuals that were in those programs.
That's a good place for, I realize I didn't give much context to this discussion, and I want to get to Kirsten here too. The reason I asked Kirsten and Denise to come on is because in, I believe it was 2014, Kirsten worked in my team, and we began a program called It's My Life. And it was the beginning of Mental Health America's social inclusion program. It might have even been earlier because Kirsten and another woman, Siobhan Carpenter, helped develop the original program. Down the road a little bit, Denise and some of the others, Denise, by the way, works for one of our affiliates in Passaic County, New Jersey. So Denise has run another version of the program called Peer Partners. So let's go back to Kirsten for a minute. Kirsten, tell us about how It's My Life came about and what it was for and what that was like in the beginning.
Well, it was, we didn't actually deal with people for probably at least the first 6 months because we had to develop all the paperwork for the program. We developed binders with all the questionnaires and all of that in it. And we also had to get training. We went to Boston University, me and Siobhan, and had to get a degree in psychiatric rehabilitation. And that was very difficult. And then we had to find the people to be in the program. And that turned out to be difficult. We only ended up getting 20 people all together, but we tried for a long time. It took a long time to get anybody.
And what was the point of the program at that time?
Well, the point of the program was to help women with schizophrenia who were over 18 to improve their social lives. And we also had the luxury of having a stipend, $60 a month stipend for them to like do things like we had one lady go to a bakery. We had another lady get into photography. We had another lady get into guitar lessons, dance lessons, all sorts of things.
Well, thanks, Kirsten. It gives us a little bit of basis, and I'm going to talk more about this program later. But so Denise, then a couple of years go by, and I guess it occurred to me that while we had great success, Kirsten and Siobhan had amazing outcomes with the people they worked with. They loved the program. We looked at certain kinds of indicators to tell if it was effective. The main thing we looked at, and the main thing we always want to look at in peer programs, is are we improving people's quality of life? And so we looked at that. And again, that program was extremely effective. The problem was that it was relatively expensive. It required to serve 20 people the services of 2 full-time peer specialists. So we came up with another idea, which was a support group model that Denise was just talking about. So Denise, talk about where we started and what your thought was before we did the program and where you thought it was going to go.
That's better. So my idea of, because I've ran a lot of support groups before, so I was familiar with how to run a support group. But the thing about it is starting a group from the ground up was also difficult because it took about 2-3 months before we really got it off the ground. And we had sent, flyers out to like ICMS, Integrated Case Management Services here in Passaic County, to any programs that we could think of that had peers. And then we sent out to the newspapers that we had a program starting, and if any peers would be interested to join. Plus, the good thing about it is that they got a $60 a month stipend, believe it or not.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Wow, great. And so we got some individuals. At first we had 2-3 individuals when we first started, but that's not enough for a group, really. So then we ended up with about 5-6 people, but they were not only people that had schizophrenia, because I believe within connectedness, we need to use inclusion. So if we have 2 clients from the same program that would have started, and one would have said, oh, I have schizophrenia, and the other one said, I have a diagnosis of depression, and they would have both applied to the same program, it would have been a big problem, because maybe one of them would have been accepted and one of them wouldn't. So we included everybody that applied and needed the support in the group to get out into the community. We started
We had a reason for that. We were funded by Janssen, and the Janssen program, it was strictly for schizophrenia. We had to, but we decided to only do it with women because we thought it'd be awkward because both Siobhan and I were females, so we only did women. But that's why it was only schizophrenia. I had lots of people call with bipolar and other things saying how upset they were that they couldn't get into the program, because once people found out about it, they really wanted to be in it, because like you said, that $60 a month, that sounds like such a little bit of money, but to these people, it was everything. It meant the difference. I had one lady, she saved up her money for weeks or for months, and she threw a big party for everybody.
Let me,
and we had several different parties, and lots of different events. Like we took them to the National Harbor and to the Cherry Blossom Festival and to the Horticultural Museum in DC.
let me give a little more context to how it was that we designed that program the way it was. The issue about having only people with schizophrenia was never the intention of the program, but what we needed to do was, this was a brand new idea. It was based around how do people make friends? And most people make friends because they have a shared interest that they have in common. And so we wanted to test these ideas out with people that really had the most difficulty in building relationships, staying in the community, being in healthy, ongoing relationships. And unfortunately, statistically, people with a thought disorder have the most trouble forming relationships. And so we wanted to test it there. And then Kirsten had it right. When I was hiring the peer specialist to run this program, I initially wanted to have one man and one woman, because I could only hire 2 people for the program. Mm-hmm. But the only people I found, and the 2 very, very best people I found, were Kirsten and Siobhan. And the original program was really unique because the peer coaches actually went with the people into the community, often at night, to go to a movie, to go to a concert, to go to all kinds of things. We didn't want to have an aspect of the program that we couldn't understand, we couldn't account for. And so we decided in that first group that Kirsten worked with, the 20 women, that we would only have women in that group, and therefore there would be no conflicts and no friction that we couldn't understand. So that's how we got where we are. Denise, so what happened from there?
Well, the funny thing is that there were guys, there were more men than actually women joining in on the group. And those are my success stories, actually. And I do have testimonials that I can read if you want me to. But the thing about it was they were so interested in the paperwork and learning and discovering. And so they came in with high anxieties. And so being connected to each other as guys and going out together in the evenings, that brought them such joy. And I was telling them, please try to do something on your own, but it always came back to, we want to be together. We just, we came to this group, we know one another now. And they were actually no more these strange people that came together, but they made long-lasting friendships. And so that was amazing to me. But I do have success stories. So if you would like me to read just a brief part of each of those individuals.
Maybe if you could read just one for us.
Okay. Okay, I'll read one. And our program actually had a letter, and all the programs that started through It's My Life had a letter. So our program was B, and this individual was B5. So he said, when I first started the group, I was very nervous. I didn't feel like talking or speaking. I had extreme anxiety. I would sweat and feel very uncomfortable and didn't speak at all. When I started walking with the group and got to know everyone, I felt better as time went on. I was able to open up, not feel nervous, and got to go on outings. I had a great time on outings to the park and zoo with the group. The leaders are very nice and make me feel at ease. I really enjoyed myself and got to see zoo animals and speak, socialize, and enjoy lunch with the leaders and the groups. It's a really nice group and a lot of fun. It's a great way to make new friends and go out in the community and enjoy life.
Thank you so much. Kirsten, do you remember kind of how it worked out for somebody you worked with and what the comments were?
I'm thinking of a particular person who we were hoping would be on this panel today, that when I first met her, she was not in very good shape and was struggling with lots of different things. Didn't have a car, didn't have a job, and she's since gone on to become a peer support specialist herself. And she has a great job and she has a car now and she's got a future. And I heard that she got her own place as well.
Wow. I want to tell one story that is my favorite story from the beginning of the program. I think Siobhan was working with this person, but we had one person who had told us that she had never started a conversation with a stranger.
Oh, yes.
And was that you or was that Siobhan?
That was Siobhan.
So the way the story goes that I remember is that they were meeting together and she didn't want to meet at her apartment. So they met at a Starbucks or a coffee shop. And they were talking over like, what would you like to do? What kind of activities in the community would be of interest to you? And her real goal was to get over this shyness before she could really begin to form any kind of relationships. She ended up going to Starbucks on a regular basis, originally to meet with Siobhan, and then later, because this became her activity. She would go to Starbucks at a relatively the same day, the same time, and she began to recognize people. And all of our participants kept a journal. And I remember when Siobhan brought me her journal of the week, and she said she saw a woman that she recognized who had come in many times, and she said to her, "Oh, I recognize you. You come here often." That was the first time she'd ever spoken to a stranger, and she felt so proud of herself. And I remember a couple of years later, Siobhan told me that she spoke with her and she still had that group of friends from Starbucks or whatever the coffee shop was. And she still met with them, and it's given her a whole new outlook on life. So we're gonna go to some questions and see if some people would like to ask particular questions of the two of you. Let's start off with, let's see. Living with chronic health issues like chronic pain can increase loneliness and social isolation. Any tips on how people can help alleviate this condition for people with these problems? Something that would be similar, I guess, to what you've been doing. Would one of you like to speak to that?
I myself have diabetes too, so I'm a diabetic, and I really have to take care of my diabetes, eat regularly, take prescribed medications to lower my A1C. But also, just like mental health, I have to go outside, even I know that the pandemic is hitting us. And I noticed this for myself, is that when I sat still, it became worse because I was, first of all, thinking too much, and I was getting too scared. Second of all, my numbers would increase because I wasn't exercising anymore. So I made for myself a plan to at least go outside, and even if I had to walk up and down the street, walk up and down for about 10 minutes. And if I found anything interested, I always took my camera, my phone with me, and I took pictures. So I have loads and loads of videos from deer and nature just around my house. And that would give me joy. And I also started writing poems again. And that I did, and it made me feel much, much better.
Thank you. Thank you for telling us that story. Kirsten, how about you?
Well, I took a class on chronic pain or chronic diseases, and diabetes certainly is one of them. That's the reason why I took the class, was because my father had diabetes or has diabetes. And they talked about various things that you could do, but once again, social inclusion is one of the things you could do, is to tell people what's going on with you. You know, if you're not feeling well, what are you doing about it? And letting people know about it.
And kind of getting people to join together and talk about these issues. That's why
Yes.
I think that's the power of support groups in general.
Yes, and it was a support group. It was a support group. And to set goals, little goals for yourself that are measurable. Remember the goal thing that you taught us from WHAM, Impact, that it is measurable, and that you have a definite time and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that we know is important in any kind of program generally, but particularly in this program, because, you know, beyond the activities, and that's easy to talk about, people doing things, all that stuff. The whole point is to get people connected to each other, and then also, hopefully, for them to feel like they become a part of a community that's larger than themselves. And the reasons that this is so important is it's part of the human condition. It's profound. You know, we are social animals. We need connections. When we don't have them, there's all kinds of issues that arise, and our next speaker is going to talk about that. One last question for the two of you. How can we help people who are feeling lonely who also have social anxiety? How do you approach that? Kirsten, you want to start, and then Denise? We've just got a couple of minutes. So.
Well, once again, I have to say, pick up the phone, call your father, call your brother, call your sister, call your Aunt Emma and talk to them and let them know what's going on with you. And start off with your family, and then if you don't have family, start off with your good friends. Everybody's got some sort of a friend, and staying in contact is really what matters. Or writing letters. That's another thing that I talked about earlier, is writing letters and cards and letters, staying in contact. People really love getting a card in the mail, because it's such a rarity these days.
It is. Thank you. Denise, some last words?
About anxiety. Anxiety can be crippling, and sometimes people with anxiety will not pick up the phone. So I believe that the patience you bring and the calmness you bring to a conversation is the most important thing. And always encourage somebody that you're working with, and also for yourself. You know, they say, the saying is, Rome wasn't built in one day. Take small steps, a little bit at a time. If you can only do, but the major thing is to do self-care. Take good care of yourselves. That's the major point. And then you can venture out. But you have to be number one priority, taking care of your doctor's visits, making sure you're doing them, staying connected. If you have a work or a peer specialist that works with you, or even your doctors or your father, mother, sister, brother, any family, stay connected to them, but also tell them and be honest how you're feeling, and say, hey, I'm feeling a little bit down today. My heart is pumping unusually fast today, and it's kicking my booty just to get and talk to you today. Be honest. And then there can be a discussion, but a lot of people hold a lot inside. And so we have to try to get them to be honest and bring forward that discussion of how they really, really feel inside.
Thank you so much. And thank you both for participating. Now I'm really excited, and I feel very privileged to introduce the next person. Dr. Louise Hawkley is a principal research scientist in the Academic Research Center, NORC, at the University of Chicago, in ORC. She is a co-investigator on the National Institute on Aging funded panel study, the National Social Life, Health, and Aging Project, and the principal investigator of COVID supplemental study, which began in September 2020. Her research contributions are predominantly in the area of perceived social isolation, loneliness, and health during aging. She's a founding member of the International Loneliness and Isolation Research Network and a member of the Scientific Advisory Committee for the Coalition to End Social Isolation and Loneliness. So welcome, Dr. Hawkley, and I'm really glad to have you here with us today.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent.
So I kind of wanted to start off with like some of the background information on what we're talking about. I think, you know, there's been a lot of work in the last decade or so on the phenomenon of loneliness and the way we perceive it. Tell me a little bit about the science, the evolutionary basis for it.
Right. So this is work that I've been involved with for a couple of decades. It's not anything that we originated, but there's been a lot of new data that has lended support to the idea that loneliness has persisted in time because it serves a purpose. So the basic gist of any evolutionary theory is if something persists, it must have had a purpose. And in the case of loneliness, the idea is that we are such social beings because we operate better in the company with others. We actually can really fail to thrive in infants and in orphan kids who have been left to languish in orphanages in Romania in the past. You might recall those stories. It can be deadly. So we hold that there is an evolutionary purpose, that pain persists because it signals us to do something about that feeling. So given that we need others, loneliness is that prompt to go out and look for those others. There is data that that is in fact what happens, but there are caveats that go with that, because when you're lonely, especially for longer periods of time, and you can't seem to get out of that state, you start thinking perseveratively, ruminatively about all the reasons why you're not able to satisfy your social needs. And you might conclude that, you know, everybody has it in for me, poor me, I can't, you know, nobody's satisfying my needs, so I'm not even going to try anymore. And so it becomes worse. You do have interactions with other people, you may find yourself being defensive. Maybe people aren't going to understand me, or I don't really think they trust me, or maybe I don't trust them. It's a big part of it. And so it fosters poor relationship quality, poor interactions, and that's a really big part of loneliness. It isn't just, you know, this is a definitional thing. It's not that you're alone or not, it's that you feel like nobody's including you. And those poor relationship qualities foster that sense.
So explain a little more the distinction between being alone and loneliness, and why some people have a greater feeling of loneliness when they are alone and others don't.
Yeah, the first part I can answer clearly, the second maybe
Okay.
not as clearly. So I think we've all had the experience of being alone happily. We enjoy some of our times alone. They are times when we're creative, or times that we need to have to ourselves to think about our aims in life, or whatever it might be. There are other times where being alone is not what we want, and it feels uncomfortable. And it's that discomfort that kind of characterizes loneliness. So conversely, you can be around other people. You can be interacting with other people, for all intents and purposes, looking like you're really well connected, but you're not feeling it. Something's not right about what you need and want out of your social interaction, relationships, and what you're actually getting. So you can feel disconnected in spite of having others around you and with you. As far as how is it that some people, you know, given a certain context, some people feel lonely in that context and others don't. Well, one of the theories we have about it is that when you talk about loneliness having an evolutionary purpose, you also kind of assume that there is a heritable component, that we're inheriting this capacity to be lonely. And that capacity to be lonely means something behaviorally. What does it mean? It means likely that people inherit different thresholds for what it takes to feel lonely. And we need variation in that, in our human history, in our current environment. It's always good to have people who differ in how sensitive they are to feeling lonely or isolated. We need the brave souls who don't need anybody around to go, you know, go to the moon or whatever it might be, go live in Antarctica for a few years. But we also need those people who are going to stay close to home, tend the hearth. So that's all needed, and the comfort level is possibly what it is that we're inheriting, the comfort level with these different levels of interaction.
That's a really interesting point and an interesting way to look at it, because when you say that, it makes perfect sense. And yet it was something that seemed like it was so difficult to understand, and now I feel silly. But, talk a little bit about why different groups, whether it's gender or age or ethnicity or whatever, why different groups deal with these concepts in different ways, and why certain groups are more at risk for the negative consequences.
Right. Well, to distinguish consequences from the loneliness itself. So why is it that we know, for example, that racial minorities tend to be more at risk for feeling lonely than do Caucasians in this country? And part of the thinking there is that there is almost an objective reality and an explanation for why they might feel lonely, and that is because their perception of how included they feel in society is probably pretty close to the reality that they aren't as accepted in society. So that goes for a lot of peripheralized and marginalized groups, whether it's racial minorities, whether it's LGBT, any peripheralized group could be in that situation where it isn't just about, do I have a sense of personal connection to individual other people, but do I have a sense of connection to a world that accepts me the way I am? And that is another dimension to loneliness. So we think of loneliness as having at least three facets. One is this just almost like a sense of self loneliness. I'm comfortable with who I am and with the people I have around me. I feel like my sense of self has expanded, and it includes these close others. There is another type of loneliness that we think of as being more relational. It's about the confidants that we have around us. Can we share intimately with friends, relatives, those deep and important things that are dear to us? Then there's a third sense that I was talking about more with this group sense of belonging, which is, we call it collective connectedness. It's a sense that you do have a sense of belonging to a larger group. That group can differ. Whatever is important to you, whatever group is most important to you, could be what makes or breaks your sense of connectedness. So yeah, the differences by race and ethnicity, by LGBT, even by socioeconomic status, can all be related to your perception of how well you fit and belong into a larger group.
How about with the various groups, the openness to actually talk about these issues and how, as a distinct group, however you define them, that their attitudes about talking about it may affect the experience. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I captured what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I'm not sure I quite follow that. There will be differences, certainly are differences in how willing people are to talk about the experience. And part of the reason why I think loneliness itself has been slow to appear on the public radar is that it's been viewed as a personal failing. Mm-hmm. You're lonely, you don't admit it because there's a certain stigma that goes with it. Yeah. I think that's something that we have to, and are starting to work our way through, around, that this is a legitimate concern. And I think COVID has really brought that to the fore.
Yeah. This is asking you to speculate totally, but is it, as we talk about how different groups have developed their feelings of loneliness, and some of it's due to being marginalized as a group, talking about race and ethnicity and gender and all of this. Is there a chance that that those feelings of loneliness play a role in bringing different groups together to overcome that feeling of separation?
Yeah, I think there have been attempts in the past when people have sought to intervene to reduce loneliness. Let's just take all these lonely people and put them in a room, and at least I'll have somebody to talk to. Yeah. It ends up that misery breeds misery. You don't tend to pull people out of that. You really need to get beyond that it's kind of a simplistic assumption that just simple contact is going to improve things. Because as I was saying, this is not a matter of just being alone or not. It's a matter of how you feel about who you're with. And you really want to be fostering good relationships, good interactions with people. And that means moving beyond wallowing in your own state and sharing it with other people. You have to find a way to step out of that and grow your network.
For a way that works for you as an individual, yeah. And then also perhaps as a group. If we set the COVID experience aside for a moment, is there really, is loneliness or social isolation, is that an expanding issue in society? And are we starting to understand why that might be happening?
Yeah. You've probably, I think many on this webinar may have heard the terminology, we have an epidemic of loneliness, or we have an epidemic of isolation. Well, certainly during COVID, we've had a huge uptick in isolation by virtue of being asked to limit our contact with other people. And maybe loneliness has gone up to a certain extent. But in general, have we experienced a huge uptick in the proportion of the population that is suffering from loneliness? The data are far from clear on that front. In fact, in older adults, where people assume this is the lonely group and they're just getting worse and worse, no, this is a robust group. And if anything, loneliness seems to be decreasing with successive generations. So there isn't anything about an epidemic that the data show conclusively about older adults. Rates, that is, number of people per thousand who are lonely has not changed. In younger adults, it's not clear yet because there aren't good data on this front. Some would suggest that with the introduction of the smartphone and lots of social media that we're in fact showing, we're isolating each other as young people. That's not really clear either. It turns out that depends how you use social media, depends how you use technology more generally.
Yeah, so looking at some of the Cigna data that came out in the last 3 or 4 years, their reports on loneliness, and you see these percentages of different age groups. And in fact, I think what I was talking about earlier was I saw on some that came out in 2020 that it was almost a reverse order, that the younger the generation, the greater the sense of disconnection or loneliness, and that older adults, baby boomers and even older, seem to have something about them. And I believe when you and I talked before, you referred to resiliency, which is something we talk about a lot in mental health. But I'd like you to talk about it in this context.
Yeah, and this loneliness curve, as we call it, a U curve, is really high in young adult. It decreases with age and really doesn't increase in prevalence until old age. And part of that, resilience is possible at any age, but it's really interesting to study it now because the expectation during COVID especially is that older adults, they're so vulnerable to this disease, it must be terrible for them in every other way. But in fact, with age, the type of resilience we see is that they're able to pull in past experiences and not be as affected. They've lived through a lot of difficult things in the past, and they know going through this, it's, this too shall pass. And there is also a sense of generativity that comes with a long life. You start to see that, the world will not end when you end, and you start thinking about the world continuing after you leave, and you're thinking of what you're leaving for future generations. And that generativity is a form of resilience. It's true that it happens in young adults as well. There is some data that, at least now with the COVID experience to go by, young adults who have good pre-pandemic social relationships are those who survive this experience in a better state than those who started out being badly off.
Mm-hmm. Is there any, there's so much going on now and so many studies being funded around the COVID experience, COVID-19 crisis. Is there any sense that there will be a residual effect going forward in terms of the way that people interact?
Yeah, I would hope so. I think one of the things that's come to the fore, and I hope won't be soon forgotten, is that this conundrum we're in of socially isolating ourselves, of having to limit our contact, which we heed with varying degrees of compliance, is not new in society. We have had around us all along older people, for example, who have been completely housebound, lucky if they see somebody for anything other than grocery delivery every 2 weeks or a month or longer. But we have not seen them. Now we know. not only have we had a similar experience, but we also know that it's not right, it's not human to ignore that. We need to pay attention to all of those people around us who are lacking those kinds of social contacts. We know how important they are to us, and they are to everybody.
Has any of your work looked into solutions for issues like this? I know one thing, I mean, that came up in a conversation I was in the other day, just talking about how there are many different social problems that we address in various ways, that loneliness is relatively invisible. And to know if in your community, if loneliness is an issue, is really very, very difficult without some sort of academic study being done on the population. Has any of your work taken you into ways we can address the people you were just talking about, the people who maybe only see somebody every 2 weeks, other than Meals on Wheels or something like that?
Right. Well, a number of attempts have been made, and just let me preface it by saying there is no one solution that's going to fit everybody. There are lots of reasons why people can feel lonely, and probably as many reasons and as many ways as one could intervene. Certainly on a very a psychological level, for somebody who's really deeply mired in their loneliness, it's probably something that will go beyond a neighborhood level intervention. It will probably involve some kind of cognitive behavioral treatment or something like that to help those individuals think about their social lives in a more adaptive way, rather than constantly feeling like they're at the victim end and not able to get out of it. But yeah, on the neighborhood level or the community level, I'm working with the Illinois Aging Services right now. The area agencies on aging have received some additional funds from Governor Pritzker to deal with social isolation among the clients they interact with, which they vary, but there will be some homebound group, people in that mix as well. And the friendly phone call is a popular strategy, just having a way for older adults to have an interaction, a safe interaction in this context. Anything that is purposeful, like volunteering, if there are ways that people can volunteer, that's very helpful. When I say purposeful, I also think about autonomy and agency. It's very easy for people on the outside, shall we say, to determine this is what you need and I'll give you what you need. And one of the biggest factors in feeling lonely is the feeling that you don't have control, that you're not able to choose. And so the more we can involve the very people who are affected in devising solutions that they are invested in, that they have a stake in, the more likely they'll have success.
Yeah, I mean, that thought fits in perfectly with the work that we do in mental health. And as a peer, as an individual who lives with a mental health disorder myself and my own experience, we have our saying that's been used by many groups around the world, but is nothing about us without us. And if you're going to do something, we need to be a part of not only doing it, but the planning, the conceptualizing, everything. This is, it's an interesting conversation. Just one last thing. I've looked over the last few years at some of the stuff that came out of the United Kingdom over recent years. And, I just thought it was so cool when Prime Minister May appointed a minister of loneliness.
Yes.
But what it said to me, and then I read a little more about it, was a recognition of what was happening to their social structure because they weren't addressing it. And it seemed like maybe in their culture, it was a little bit easier to marshal, a bigger effort. I know they brought in the postal service to talk to people, bank tellers, grocery clerks. I saw this one thing about these benches they put in parks that said, if you sit here, you have to be willing to talk to someone who says hello. And, these wonderful things.
Yeah.
that they did. Is that what we need to do to make a dent?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be surprised if there are pockets in this country where they have tried things like that with
Yeah.
some degree of success. I think, again, this is going to be, it's not only an individual being involved, but it's whole communities finding a solution that works for them, which may be different in another community.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I know we have a couple of questions. I hope you don't mind.
That's fine.
Let's see. What do we know about why young people are so reluctant to reach out? And how can we help younger and more diverse populations that experience loneliness? They're kind of broad, but.
Yeah. Well, I guess the first part of that is, do we know that young people, how did that question get put?
What do we know about why young people are so reluctant to reach out?
Are young people reluctant to reach out? I don't know.
Yeah.
If they are, then part of it could be, and I say this rather advisedly because I think the research is still not clear on this front. There is a concern that the more young people rely on, shall we call it asynchronous interaction, that they're not sure how to interact in a real life setting where they have to be there in the moment. Examples of people talking about, going to Starbucks and wanting to order a coffee, and the person behind the counter, a young person, had no idea how to interact. Just didn't know what to do. It's like a social skill that was lacking. So I don't know if that's what it is. Then there's definitely an argument to be made for moving toward almost didactic social skill training.
Yeah.
But definitely more exposures and modeling of what a good social interaction might look like.
It kind of, we had Pat Corrigan on earlier, and Pat has done so much work on stigma, but also self-stigmatizing attitudes, and this is something that we talk about frequently in mental health. It's just a constant issue. It seems like there's some of that also involved, self-stigmatizing, that when we feel different, particularly when we're young and we're not too sure of ourselves yet anyway, that maybe that's part of what creates it.
Yeah, if that's embedded in that question, I would definitely agree. I mean, that's exactly what I was referring to when we talk about the evolutionary theory of loneliness, and how this loop of loneliness spirals into getting worse and worse. It's just, you start buying into a narrative that leaves you vulnerable, feeling victimized, feeling excluded, which affects how you interact. You're not going to be as forthcoming if you think others don't think well of you or don't want to give you the time of day. So yeah, it can make it worse.
Yeah. This question, I'm not sure if it's in your area or not, but I'll go ahead and ask it. How do we address feeling isolated from coworkers who may not have a firsthand understanding of what it is like to live with a mental health diagnosis? Has any of your work overlapped into well, I know you work in mental health because this is
mental health.
But people who are diagnosable and that kind of.
Yeah. And so the question is, what exactly again?
How do we address feeling isolated from coworkers who don't have a firsthand understanding, so they're not a diagnosis themselves, about what it's like to live a diagnosis?
That's a tough question. I don't know that I have a specific answer, but it's certainly not the only domain where it's hard to communicate across lines where the experience is not shared. Right now, with a lot of the work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's concern and confusion around, I don't know really what it's like to be a Black person in this country. So how do I talk to this person? And that happens in a lot of domains. So I think it's a learning exercise on all sides. That's about all I can say at this point.
Yeah, certainly makes it more complicated. Somebody wants to know how they can stay connected to you.
Well, you can follow my literature. I publish. I'm at NORC. You can find me there.
I know you're easy to find because I found you in many places. So
Okay.
looking for. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise.
This is an issue that is very big in the mental health field, and it does seem to be growing in the mental health field. And then we also are looking at what's going on in mental health and the imposed isolation of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And we're starting to realize that, you know, there's also a trauma element to that we're going to have to address. It's a little different maybe than the way we've addressed it before. And then we also have the issue about our resources are going to be limited because states in general who pay for a lot of mental health services, but any type of services like this, you know, their revenues are down. And so it's going to be interesting. You know, I had an interesting conversation with Pat and with Clarence Jordan with Beacon Health about, you know, what's it going to look like next year?
Right.
What's that going to do to the work we do? Are we going to change direction, or is this just going to open up new questions that we haven't even thought of before?
Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing, I mentioned this both in this context and thinking about just general approaches to readying oneself for life. It's not easy, if not impossible, to have or develop a social network around you when you need them, like now during COVID. We really need to be feeding our social relationships all through life. They aren't going to materialize miraculously at that particular point. And by that, I mean, not just relying on them every step of the way, but actually sharing life in its entirety, sharing good times with other people creates a bond, creates a really rich bond that's, I think one of our colleagues in California talks about sharing good times as building capital. So think of it as social capital that earns interest. So the more of this good stuff you put in the bank, the more there will be later on. Let's say you need something.
Right.
I think we just need to keep that in mind all through life, that we have to feed those relationships. They're not going to just maintain themselves.
Right. Thank you again. And I'm going to be talking now about a series of programs that we've done at Mental Health America. And I have to admit, I use the term epidemic when I talk about love, but forgive me. And thank you again. And take
You're
care.
very welcome. Bye.
Bye. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Mental Health America's Peer Partners program, which is part of what we talked about with Denise and Kirsten earlier. You know, one of the leading risks for overall poor health is isolation and loneliness. And when you start looking at the health consequences to loneliness, it's staggering, really. It's so scary. And, you know, as Dr. Hawkley was saying, I mean, this is not something that just suddenly appeared, but it is something that we seem to be talking about and be more aware of now. Yeah, and we know that loneliness has effects on virtually every part of our health, whether it's mental health or physical health. People who are severely lonely have higher rates of heart disease, even increased rates of cancer, COPD, any kind of chronic condition is either made worse or it really seems to come to the forefront when people experience this. In order to combat this, we've looked at creating ways that people can build relationships and connections to the communities they live in. And we started what's called Peer Partners Support Group a few years ago. So it's structured as a support group. This was the group that Denise was involved in. And it's facilitated by a peer specialist. and they work with people to develop their own social plan. In other words, identify what their social goals are. And I can tell you that going through, I've been doing this now in this program for 7 years, I believe, and almost exclusively the major goal that people have when you start to drill down, what is your real goal? What is so important to you that you're willing to make a major change in your life? It comes down, people want friends. That's it. It sounds very simple, but that's what people want. Technically, peer support, peer partners is a combination and a unique combination of peer support, self-directed care, which is an emerging practice where people take more responsibility and the ability to manage health funds for their own situations. And then psychiatric rehabilitation, which is really just primarily learning to function well in society. And for some people, that means learning for the first time, learning the social skills that maybe they missed out on if they became ill at a young age. Or for other people who have kind of been pushed out of the work market or pushed out of relationships or found themselves because of mental health problems, isolated and alone, relearning those skills. But peer partners is more than that. It's really what it's about is an engaging way to meet interesting people and do interesting things. And how much more pure can that be? Like I said, when we surveyed people, and we always do, people coming into the program, the nearly unanimous goal is to have at least one friend, and that goes way back. Mental health problems are one of the leading causes of loneliness. They're not the only cause of it, but they're one of the leading causes. And sometimes it's because when we live with a diagnosis, when we live with the symptoms that we might have around our mental health issues, we become afraid to be around other people, maybe because we're afraid of being judged, or maybe because we are just, embarrassed and self-stigmatizing, like we talked about before. And sometimes it's because other people are afraid to be around us. And this is part of the stereotypes that people living with mental health problems face every day. Research has shown us that connectivity, social connectivity, is a powerful tool for achieving recovery in mental health and creating opportunities to have a life that's meaningful to us as individuals. So that when we connect to the world around us, when we know we have that one person who has our back, that one person who believes in us, who is our friend, that's an incredibly powerful tool in moving towards recovery in mental health. Traditional approaches such as medications, hospitalization, dynamic psychotherapy have a limited effectiveness when applied to socialization and work aspects of individuals with psychiatric disabilities. Virtually every mental health provider in public health has some sort of social program. But unfortunately, they've not been very successful over the years. And that's why we still have a very large number of people out there who feel very alone and vulnerable. Our goal with peer partners is to help build networks of friends and intimate relationships, and thereby create a strong social support system, which is what everyone needs. Positive connections increase self-esteem. So when I make a new friend, I feel better about myself. Somebody saw value in me and wants to be my friend. And it also gives that feeling of self-worth. Self-esteem and self-worth are critical to self-love, and self-love is essential to a happy life. I love this quote from Oscar Wilde: "To love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong romance." So what we've got now in society is separation. When we talk about people living with mental health diagnoses, they go to separate places to receive services. They frequently live in kind of enclaves. They may live in group homes. They may live in housing in the community, but it might still be, you know, a apartment complex that works primarily with people with disabilities. Separation is not what we want. Sometimes we impose it ourselves, and sometimes society imposes it on us. Integration is the next step. But integration is just meaning that, okay, now we're in the community. Now that house we live in is in the community. Now we get to go to the same stores and the same schools and all of that. But it doesn't mean that we connect or that we actually feel a part of the community. What we really want is inclusion, just full inclusion. The ability for people to be a part of the community, to interact with everyone else, almost without regard to whatever else our situations are. So, welcome to Peer Partners. This is a peer initiative. It was conceived of by individuals with mental health diagnoses. It was developed by people with mental health diagnoses, and it's been enacted and provided now for a number of years by people with mental health diagnoses, and the purpose is to end social exclusion and loneliness. This is the cover of our coach's handbook, and we'll talk more about what's available to you to learn more about this program. Many programs, like I said, try to provide social skills to improve lives. And like I said, and almost every mental health service does, but they have limited success. And you can see that all the time. I mean, even schools make big efforts to try to bring people together, but there's always those people who stay on the edge, stay on the fringe. Some of it is because people push them to the margins of society, and part of it is because they seek refuge there because of their fear of being involved in the world around them. And that's a feeling of having less self-worth. Peer Partners is different. It's built around the concept that people make friends throughout their lives through shared interests. You know, how do we make friends? When you're a child, it's relatively simple. You go to the playground, you could be sitting in the sandbox, and you can say to the kid next to you, do you want to be my friend? And then maybe they do, and you end up building sandcastles. Finding people who like to do the same things that we like to do gives us an opportunity to have a conversation. And a conversation provides an opportunity to begin building a friendly relationship. And that's where everything starts. The Peer Partners model is based around peer life coach training. So we have peers that run these groups who are well trained in most states. I believe 47 states now have certification for peer specialists, and we like people in those states to have that. California doesn't quite have theirs yet, but they also already have 6,000 peer specialists working in their system. Then to make the program work, recruitment. And you know, Denise and Kirsten both mentioned how hard that was to get people who are feeling outside of everything to take a chance, to risk something by joining a group. That can be scary. Then you go through a process of goal setting, and goal setting sounds easy. I mean, we all set goals, right? And maybe the most popular goal, if you ask people what their goal is for the coming year, there's a couple that come to the top. One is I want to lose weight. The other one is I want to work out at a gym. And those two goals are also the ones that probably have the lowest success rate. Now, the people probably do want to lose weight. Probably really important. So we go through a process, and Kirsten referred to it. It's used in some other programs. But what you're trying to do is find out what's the real goal. So I remember in a class I was teaching, and we were doing this goal setting. We asked everybody to identify a goal. Woman said she wanted to lose weight. We said, so why do you want to lose weight? Well, because then I can fit into more of my clothes and, you know, I'll look better. So how would your life be different if you could fit into these clothes and look better? Well, I'd be more likely to go out and meet new people. And how would that affect you? if you can go out and meet new people. Well, I'll have more friends and my life will have even more to it. Right there, you found a pretty important reason. But we continued to ask this woman these kind of defining questions. And within 2 or 3 more questions, she told us the real reason. She was pre-diabetic, she had children, and her real goal was she wanted to live long enough to see her daughter get married. And when she said that, and she cried and we all cried, we knew that we had found something that was so incredibly important that she would be willing to make those changes in her life that were needed for her to lose weight and control her diabetes. Then we also, some people go through these skill building, and we use a lot of stuff from Boston University's Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation. It sounds very psychiatric, but it's really just about learning social skills, you know, ways to start a conversation, ways to understand what a good friend is and what a not so good friend is. You know, how do you know who you can trust? And for people who've been isolated, that can be very difficult. We figure on social activities, social outings, but it's not necessarily a group going out and doing it. In peer partners, what happens in the support group is people team up to support each other. So let's say my activity that I want to do is to go bowling. Let's say that's what I want to do. I want to go bowling. So my friend, who maybe doesn't even like bowling that much, goes with me so I'll feel more secure. And then while we're there, maybe we talk to the people in the lane next to us. Maybe I find out that there's a bowling league, even for beginners, that I could get involved in. And so now maybe I've begun to lay the groundwork to have further community involvement. We also have to have evaluation ways to look at the success of the program and then the overall results. And we don't need to get into those now. They're available to you, and I'll explain how to access them in a little bit. The standard for success, the true evaluation, is do people feel that this program improves their quality of life? My thing is, in all of behavioral health, and particularly in behavioral health and peer support, if we're not improving people's lives, if we're not improving their quality of life, then we're not doing it right. So the question is, are people able to meet interesting people who like to engage in the same kind of activities that they enjoy? And are they able to then have interesting conversations that provide an opportunity for further contact? That's the purpose of that going out, is to meet somebody who likes what you like, that you can talk to about it. And then that opens a door that maybe you can talk to them at another time and begin to build a relationship. Skill building, like I said, there's a bunch of things. Examining the rules of friendships. You know, this one says, we all have a mental image of what a good friend is supposed to be. We make or lose friends because they do or do not live up to our standards. What has experience taught you about friendship? And then people will begin to answer that. And this can be done as a group exercise in the support groups. So there's a number of tools available through the program to develop all kinds of skills, but it's all self-selected. The social outings, people make choices that suit them and that they enjoy. So they figure out things they want to go do. They find activities that allow you to be around other people who like the same things. And these activities encourage social interaction. So one of the things that we use frequently are, well, that people choose frequently are classes. Maybe they go to a community center and take an art class, or maybe they go and take a music lesson. Maybe they go, and I know we did this community I live in. I worked with many people here in mental health for many years, and one thing I really enjoyed was there was a writing stable that would allow us to come in. They didn't charge us anything, and people could take writing lessons one day every week. So it can be any number of things. Another thing that people do that ends up being really important, and I referred to it briefly before, but is journaling, or what we call guided journaling. So the journals ask some simple questions about, what we did and any kind of successes that we felt we had and any barriers that we faced. And then you come back to the group, the support group, and you can discuss what you've written down. And the journaling is also an opportunity for creativity. And I find, and there's some really good basis for believing this to be true, that when people are engaged in creative activities, they open up in a way that, one, perhaps makes other people wish to engage with them, but also makes them feel more open to those outside engagements. Somebody who comes up and says, wow, you painted that? That's beautiful. It's a wonderful conversation to begin with. So for the journal entries, we found out all kinds of things about people. This was from our early group that we did that Kirsten was a part of. Person said, I am more confident to speak with people I don't know. This is that lady that I told you about. I'll introduce myself and talk to them. She's talking about now. I used to wait for people to come to me. Now I start the conversation. If you had ever met this woman and seen just how shy she was and how painful that was for her, and then to just see that joy on her face when she accomplished her first goal of speaking to somebody. Another person says, it's helped me to reach out and connect with other people. I love the program. It's like a dream come true. I'm learning new things about myself and others. Guided journals, for some of us, like I said, initiating a conversation can open up doorways to develop connections. I feel good about pushing myself to go to ballet class. That was one of the things that we actually in a small group had a number of people who wanted to do. And we found a ballet studio that would, I think they charged them nothing to go in for some lessons. And in doing it, in going, this person said, it made me feel assertive. And that was something really important to them. Repeated exposure to experiences and other people takes away a lot of our social anxiety and shyness that is so often felt by people who have experienced social exclusion and isolation, that feeling of, because I receive mental health services, because I have a diagnosis, somehow I'm not part of mainstream society. I'm the other. I'm somebody on the fringe of society. The program helps me be a little more confident. The friendships I have now are firmer since starting this program. That, simple statement, but it says it all. So if you're interested in peer partners, it's easy to find out more about it. You can go to mhanational.org, which is our website, and then go to the MHA Center for Peer Support, or you can just search on Center for Peer Support on Google and go directly into our Center for Peer Support. And when you get there, you scroll down a little bit and you'll see some choices that you can make. And the middle one is called It's My Life Social Self-Directed Care Program. That name will be changing soon, but the link will still be there, helping people build networks of friends and intimate relationships. So you click on Learn More, and it'll take you to a page that says it will take you to training materials. So you just click on training materials, and it comes up. If this is your first time here, then you need to create an account. And it's very simple. Click on the blue button that says create a new account and just set up your account. All it asks for really is an email address for you to create a password, to create a username and a password. Then you can add in your email address. People who want to remain anonymous, we're building in a method for that where they don't even have to we don't really care if you tell us your real name. And you can set up an email address any way you want. But set up your account, because once you do, then you'll be able to access the Peer Partners program in a box. And what this is all of the elements of the Peer Partners program, all of the tools that an organization will need to put together one of these programs. And down at the bottom in that blue button, you can download the entire thing. And we're going to be continuously adding to this. We're adding a lot of new resources all the time. We're trying to take some of the skill building activities and make them more fun by using animation. We'll have more video involved in some of this stuff. But everything that you need is there. Some of this still refers to it as It's My Life, which is the original program. Peer Partners is an aspect of It's My Life. But it's there for you. It's free. We're willing to provide you with technical assistance. There are webinars that are recorded that you can access that will take you through the whole program, or you can contact me or Katrina McIntosh, who works with me, and we will be happy to talk to you. Our email addresses are very simple. I don't know why hers isn't active, but it's really just my first initial, P for Patrick, and my last name, Hendry, P. Hendry, at mhanational.org. Katrina's is the same way. It's kmcintosh at mhanational.org. So feel free to contact us if you have questions, take a look at what's available. And then I want to tell you that in the very near future, over the next few months, we're going to be opening a new part of the program called I Am Not Alone. And it's a fully virtual program. It'll be fully self-contained on the internet. So there will be activities that people can join in, but because of social isolation and distancing right now, it's going to be slow for everything to open back up. So we're hoping to get some of this out. And there are also people who still have difficulty going to something, and maybe accessing it virtually might be a more simple way to start. But we're going to have classes in art and music. I'm going to teach some classes myself in photography. We are going to ask the people who participate in the program to create their own tutorials and classes. We hope to have live music events. We hope to build a gaming community. So, it can grow as big as the people who join in, and we try to access anything they ask for, and we certainly welcome them. We're going to be building some templates that will help people put their own classes together. So thank you for joining us in this whole thing today. This has been really important to us to get this conversation out there. We've wanted to do this for a long time. It's an important conversation, and it reaches in, throughout, it's an issue of science and everything that goes along about the hows and the whys. It's a personal issue that touches every person's life at some point. And it's a societal goal to build a healthier society, which we all need all the time. So contact us. Here's some more contact information for us. Join us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And like I said, contact me whenever you feel like it. And I thank you for your participation. Take care.